Welcome back everyone to the second episode of my deep dive dive of the K-1337 mobile player home and workshop submarine. Oh Todd, that's already a super long title for this project, but well, here we are. In the previous episode we talked about what made me choose this project, and today we are on the step of further organization and planning. Because what happens if you build something without a plan? Yes, it grows into utter chaos. Hence, it's significantly important to lay down everything and adjust it. Let's get into the planning, because technically, I had to pre-design somewhat of a blueprint of a submarine first. Because I cannot even start thinking about multiple locations, retextures, specials, and the interior design without having the main attraction itself, of course. So the first question was, what kind of submarine do I want to build? See, submarines can have different purposes. Exploration, charting the sea, surveillance, reconnaissance, intelligence, espionage, monitoring, hacking, executing a nuclear strike with an ICBM, sinking enemy ships or supply convoys with torpedoes, praising the almighty divinity of God Howard. If you're very patriotic, you also could utilize its shape to put it up your ass. The possibilities are limitless what to use the submarine for. The Yangtze 31 of the Chinese Liberation Army is a stealth submarine shooting ICBMs. Hence, it has to be a bigger one to carry those missiles. But I wanted my submarine to be significantly smaller than a Yangtze because certainly I do not need to compensate for something else, yo. As I was briefly watching documentaries on spycraft and also get a Hearts of Iron DLC with that very topic for my birthday a month before, I was hooked on all the espionage stuff. And with my vast knowledge of Fallout lore from my game shows since 76 like Who Wants to Be a Capioneer, where a player's knowledge of Fallout lore is tested, I do possess the necessary know-how of implementing it into the story of Fallout. I actually thought firstly about a project of Vault-Tec with the SUB, the Submersible Underwater Boat. A project of Vault-Tec to further fine adjust their sealing methods for the vaults and left multiple submarines to rot in harbors and the bottom of the sea that failed rigorous testings. But that was a little bit too large of a project for a deadline of only 35 days. I mean, imagine building one submersible within 35 days. That is already quite rough, but then multiple? It would make sense for the multiple locations idea I had, but without a quest or a story, that would be rather sad, and I also wouldn't be able to build multiple of them in time. While that idea is not entirely out of my project book for the future, it was vastly evident I would not be able to make that happen in time. So I needed a single submarine that just acts as a mobile base for the player from another force. Before I drop the faction, let me get this straight. This is the town of Marinka in the Donetsk Oblast of Ukraine. This is what the Russian government calls liberation and reunification with their Ukrainian brothers. Besides destroying civilian infrastructure and killing civilians far off the front lines with drones like the infamous Geran 2 from Iran, about which even the atomic heart developer Monfish Studios made something they called a fun Easter egg, of drones carrying Geran flowers, Russia also threatened several times to cause a nuclear meltdown in the occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and detonate the Kakhovka Dam, which not only again also affected innocent bystanders of civilians in the town of Kherson, but also destroyed the environment and wildlife for probably decades. If this is a tolerable military strategy, is up for everyone to decide for themselves. But what does this have to do now with the mod, you may ask? Because I chose the faction of the submarine to be the Soviet Union. All of that is not an open invitation now to start polemic discussions in the comments. I chose it because I have a lot on my mind and a lot on my heart. I could put perfectly into writing a story that touches certain real-world issues with an anecdote, a metaphor. This is how I express myself. And also I could write it in absolutely no time, saving myself a lot of time on this deadline that I'm having for merry modding days. So after this decision was made, which also serves greatly as a gapfill of how people like Vadim and Yefim Boburov in Fallout 4 kept this weird accent, or call it the accident if you like, I sit down to design the blueprint of the military submarine, which requires a lot of rooms. The control room, a command deck, an electronic warfare room, a torpedo launch bay, a battery room, the nuclear reactor, a nuclear reactor control room, a cooling unit for the nuclear reactor in its own room, and a control room for the cooling unit in its own room for the nuclear reactor, a machinery room, an engine room, a sonar cabin of course, communications cabin, in 35 days. So now we have all these components and we have this cigar-shaped thingy to play around with. At the stern, the very front of a submarine, there's always the sonar dome. Hence a torpedo launch bay has to be practically right next to it on some level. The engine lies at the aft, the very back of a submarine, which will require some auxiliary machine room nearby too. Hence that bunch has to be packed together. But how would I build the screw system of a submarine? How did they do it for the USS Constitution? Oh! One thing came back to the other, because there's a thing about the Soviet Union maybe not everyone was aware of, but the Soviet Union has been famous for silly designs you wouldn't believe to exist or even be possible. The infamous Yagranaplan, known as the Caspian Sea Monster, the E-Kit, which is practically a flying saucer with no distinguishable drive, the ZVM-2901, which is practically a UAZ van with screw drives, the super monstrosity Kalinin K-7, that looks as if it was ripped straight out of the Wolfenstein games, the alienating triangle helicopter MiL-Me-32, there are so many more, I cannot recommend looking for them. However, what if one of those Soviet pipe dreams would be a submarine with a jet engine to make it the fastest submarine that ever existed? Of course, you'd have to ensure that compressed air is inside the fuselage so no water can actually distinguish the flame, and it most likely would be very demanding in fuel, which therefore would require a reactor with very high potent plutonium, which is something the Soviet Union liked to use anyway more than uranium. It all just came together so greatly, and so it could put it all into just one area. As the officers' quarters and mess should be close to the command bridge, and I still had some space to fill, I decided for the rather unconventional design of the sail of the conning tower to be more on the aft side of the vessel, serving somewhat like a vertical line to separate the hardware part of the submarine from the rest that would be built at the front, as inspired from the Typhoon-class submarines. That vertical line will also be the area the player can build the workshop at the start. There is an expansion plan for the future, because depending on what DLCs or other mods somebody is using, they might want to build other than the regular workbenches too, or smaller models of these at least. For the command deck, I decided to put it inside the conning tower. And therefore we also could put the communications and the sonar cabin right next to it, so it all is packed into just one. As the torpedo launch bay will be pretty long, we can then round it up with the upper level to actually put the electronical warfare room right in between. Which then leaves the entire lower deck to the rest of the crew's needs. A storage room, a galley, a mess, a doctor's room, a washing room, and the quarters stretching all the way to the sonar dome with bathrooms at the very end. If there ain't enough beds for the total amount of crew members, they still could sleep in shifts, as it occasionally is on submarines around the world here and there still. And also, I mean, who counts anyway? So there was. The rough design was done, more extras could come up while building, so I thought. So no time to lose and actually start building room by room, which would be step 3 of the mod creation progress we will cover another time, another day. Thank you for watching.